Welcome to Building Better Businesses, an ABA podcast. Learn firsthand from business owners who've built successful ABA businesses. Utilize proven techniques and strategies to help your practice thrive. This is Building Better Businesses, an ABA podcast with Jonathan Mueller.
Scott Snider is a former F-15 fighter pilot in the U.S. Air Force and the co-founder and CEO of Proven Behavior Solutions. He's a 40 under 40 winner from the Boston Business Journal, and Proven Behavior was voted 3 years in a row as a top place to work by the Boston Globe. Scott, welcome to the pod.
Hey, happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
I'm stoked, man, and there's many reasons I'm stoked, but we first met in person at the CASP conference in Portland back in May, and I sat in the front row, dude. I probably looked really creepy because I was like, you did like a 1 hour topic and you just like condensed so much extraordinary information about leadership and persuasion and other things that I could not take my eyes off. So I apologize if I was creepy then. Just know that I absorbed it and took like 6 million pages of notes.
It was a fire hose, 100% true on that one. It was definitely a fire hose of information.
It was a good fire hose, the pleasurable drowning of learning. Right?
That's right.
Well, tell me I remembered a story that you shared, and I would love for you to share the story of this fighter pilot who counterintuitively said, "I need your help," and then totally changed an after action response to what was a horrific crash that could have killed someone. Can you tell that story?
Yeah, happy to. So the context for the listeners. Back before I was doing ABA therapy, I'm in the Air Force, and one of my jobs when I wasn't flying jets was I was a flight safety officer. So I was responsible for crash investigation and root cause analysis, looking at, why are we breaking things, and hopefully, we're not killing people. And this was back, I want to say 2013 timeframe. And what happened at that time, we had a rash of accidents occurring across the Air Force due to, it wasn't pilot error. Pilot error is typically why we'd see these things. And then this time around, it was like, a maintenance person left a tool in the jet in a place where it shouldn't be, or something wasn't fastened correctly. And, we had an incident where we actually lost a jet at a nearby base. The pilot got out okay, but still, we lost this multi-million-dollar fighter jet. And looking at the reasons why, it's like, well, we have these maintenance personnel here that made some mistakes. They're process failures, and not just at the organizational level, but really across the Air Force, senior leaders were trying to wrestle with, well, how do we get these maintenance folks, they're not flyers, they're a lot of them are just high school graduates, similar to our behavior techs in education level and experience. They do a really tough job. How do we get them invested in a safety culture where they're going to be disciplined and check to make sure they're following their procedures correctly, backing each other up, and then even more when a mistake is made or they miss something, coming forward and letting us know about it proactively so we can then tear the jet apart and find that tool, whatever it is. And so now we have the situation where, to me, I thought, well, I need to talk to them, first of all. We can't get them on board. At least we tell them what the problem is and trying to get them to see it from our perspective. And I called this meeting, and I had in this large auditorium, there were probably 250, 300 of these, maintenance troops there. And they're waiting to hear me speak. And I'm a major at the time, so not a super high-ranking officer, but still, I'm an officer. And as I enter, I noticed that none of them looked like they wanted to be there, of course. I'm taking very valuable time out of their day. And I knew walking in the door, too, that I'm coming in with my flight suit on. I'm an officer. Just the image of me coming in the room was going to cause a reaction. Nothing, there was still a respectful relationship there, but, we joked that the maintainers, like the pilots, we all thought we were Maverick and Top Gun. That's what we viewed ourselves at. We're awesome. The maintenance folks, though, they looked at us as a bunch of just 300-pound Neanderthals dragging our knuckles on the ground, breaking stuff. That's what we do. We take the airplanes, we go break them, cause them more work. So I had kind of a negative, audience to begin with. They're going to be defensive, and so as I was thinking through how do I get their attention, How do I get them to listen to me and lower those defensive walls from the very get-go? It occurred to me, well, they're used to seeing guys like me get up on stage in front of them and talk down to them and like, hi, I'm Major so-and-so, and here's the situation, and you're doing this wrong, and we're going to do this, and, being more directive, less participatory. And instead, I decided to take a different approach. I didn't get up on stage. I walked down to the floor right in front of them and walking kind of the aisles, in between. And I just looked at these guys in the eyes and just said, I need your help. Like, those are the first words. It wasn't, I'm so-and-so from the safety office here to talk to you. Just said, I need your help. And I can tell you that you could hear a pin drop in the room. I had every eye focused on me, and I had full attention because that was a moment that caught them all by surprise. Like, they didn't expect it. And it added, I think, weight to the situation and the ask. And so, going back to this conversation we had about persuasion at the CASP conference, we talk about this idea of being counterintuitive and how, you can be very persuasive when you take what people expect out of a situation and do the opposite. And so in this case, as I explained, I took what I assumed to be, how they were feeling and what I understood about that and what drove it. And I decided to be a little strategic and do something different. I didn't realize I was being really persuasive at the time. It just seemed like a good idea. I know now from 7 years at Harvard and all this other academic instruction, what I was actually doing, being very strategic and deliberate. But at the time, it was kind of like a happy accident. I'm like, well, what do I got to lose? Got to try something. And, it worked out. And so after that, we were able to engage these guys and actually get them having their own kind of like quarterly meetings where they were talking about these safety topics, having those conversations. They understood our role more as flight safety officers and the things we were looking for. And, for the few years I was in that office, it really helped further that relationship.
It's a powerful lesson that, like, we need to enlist our frontline teams as partners, right, in problem solving. And what I heard you describe, Scott, was, like, number one, you left your rank at the door, right? I mean, the flight suit notwithstanding, but you came to them like at eye level. You left your rank at the door, so you didn't have that power differential. And number two, you actually you asked them for their help. Like, you created this environment of psychological safety.
100%.
You were partners, and that just feels like, right? And especially thinking about ABA practice and CEOs, it's like, don't show up as a CEO. Show up as someone who's looking to solve a problem and needs help. I think that's powerful, dude.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, when you think back to some of the major challenges that you faced growing your businesses, I mean, have you ever had an opportunity to sit down with your team and just be like, hey, you know what? Instead of me coming to you with the answers, let's workshop this one. Tell me what you think. What do you think we should do? I'm seeing a good head nod there. I mean, that's one of the big secrets to our success here in this company. And it's something that we continue to strive to do even as we get larger and larger. But you can do that exercise at every level of the organization.
Exactly. It's and guess what? You're going to get a better outcome from it. Not just because, like, your frontline teams know what's going on day to day. They've got to do the work and they've got to be bought in.
You bet.
Tell me more about your time at the Air Force, Scott. What were some, like, most important leadership lessons that you took away?
I think the most important and perhaps the most relevant to our audience here, I was taught as a young military officer that the mission happens at the lowest level. It really does. Mission success is guaranteed by the newest, least trained, most inexperienced member of your team. It doesn't matter how great of a fighter pilot you are, or a senior leader, or a BCBA, because we have a two-tier model. If those behavior techs aren't comfortable and confident in what they're doing, if they're not trained well, you're not going to see progress. You're not going to make that impact for the child. And so, learning that as a military officer, that was one of the first things we were able to transfer over and bring into our culture here at Proven. That has paid dividends for us, to this day. I mean, we are religious about training, lots and lots of training.
I want to get to training. This is really, this is powerful. Like, this idea of mission success happening at that like least trained member of the team. But let me step back. So, like, tell me how almost persuasion is important. I've always felt like and I've never been in the military, but, like, can't you just give direct orders and have people follow them?
You can. 100% true. That is very true. I'll tell you, the hardest leadership challenge I've ever had was trying to lead a group of volunteers, in grad school. That is the worst. That is the hardest thing. Well, maybe, leading a bunch of little kids in a group in a classroom probably, but very similar. Little kids in a classroom and a bunch of grad students. And it's one of the things, you always have that trump card. Legally, you have that trump card. And there are times where I think you have to use it. But I'll tell you that, at least from my experience, we were taught that you don't tell, you aren't directive, you ask. And you make it participatory. And it's almost like this understanding, beneath the surface. If an officer is asking you to do something, if they outrank you, then you usually should do it. But if you don't want to, or if there's a good reason not to, you have the room to speak up. And that's what we're trying to drive here. Speaking to those situations where you do have to be directive, I heard it relayed once that, it's like a pool of resources, if you will. Like you have all this available, directive energy that you can be like, do this, do this, do this. Well, it's finite. At some point, your people aren't going to want to do it anymore. And when we think about, human performance and motivation and what gets these guys to charge the hill over and over again, what keeps them fighting and living in horrific conditions and just pushing forward, well, there are a lot of good things that have come out of research, and people have written a lot about, in the short term, all those emotions that come into play and camaraderie that kept people going. But I don't think there's anybody that will tell you that you can continue to do that day in and day out forever. Everyone has a breaking point. There's always an end where we have to stop being directive and we have to start being participatory.
Oh, so powerful. And it's such a generalizable lesson to then working in business. And, I think in the last couple of years, I've read a couple leadership books. I think one by Jocko Willink, Extreme Ownership, and another one by, I can't remember the Navy captain, called It's Your Ship. But it was this lesson exactly. It's like empower your frontline team. So it's almost like the military has sneakily been doing this all along.
Well, you'd be surprised at the way the military has served as not just a leadership laboratory, for forever, but even for social experiments. When we look at integrating the forces, don't ask, don't tell. We finally got rid of that. It took way too long. But, that was an environment where these conversations were being pushed to the forefront, where you weren't seeing it done in business at scale. And so, maybe Congress likes to use the military as their little test bed for a lot of these things. Who knows? But yeah, I agree with you. It's a very fertile, proving ground for leadership and management. And perhaps what makes it a lot easier, though, is because we do have that latitude of being able to say, do this. You have that power, whereas in a business, well, people may just vote with their feet and leave.
And still, though, it sounds like, that to your point around the well, you're drawing. There's only so much you can draw, so you got to figure out other, more important techniques to get people to do what you'd like them to do for your mission. Well, one of the other things, and so this is much more recent for me, but that I've been trying to lean into and learn from the military, is how to deal with turnover. And so tell me if I mischaracterize any of this, but many assignments are 1, 2, 3 year stints. So it's almost like, going in that it's only going to be so long. And what's been so interesting for me to learn about is how the military has gotten really good at, to your point, the intensive training and just systems that work, even as people change and you're plugging different team members in. But do you think there's something here that the ABA field can learn from the military about working through turnover?
Oh, definitely. Yeah, it's the way the military is structured, just like you're saying, with this constant movement. And it's not movement for movement's sake. It's to make sure that we are sharing best practices and we're bringing people with fresh ideas into the organization and out of the organization. So we're not staying stagnant. So that's really, from a developmental perspective, a professional excellence perspective, that's the ultimate reason why it happens. And we can adopt that in our organizations too. When you're looking at, who are my directors? How long have they been in the seat? Well, how are you going to open up opportunities for other people if you've got somebody sitting as a director for 10 years? There's no upward mobility. So thinking creatively about how can you create lateral movement for people, opening up other learning opportunities for people. But, going back to your question, what does the military do well when it comes to this idea of transition? And for sure, a lot of it is very intensive training. And that intensive training ensures a baseline level of competency so that in theory, anyone on a team could step up to the next level because they're there, they've been trained, they're competent enough to do that, they have the ability. Where we structurally take it is that, again, from my experience, I can't necessarily speak to what happens in the Army and the Navy. We do have some differences. But generally what you find is you have what we call continuity books. And back in the day, they were, no kidding, physical binders. And now everything's digital. But it's the idea that if you are running a program, leading a team, whatever it is, you have to have some type of a Bible or something left behind that tells exactly how you do your job, so that if you were out for any reason, you got called away, deployed at the last minute, somebody can walk in tomorrow and say, oh, okay, this is exactly what I need to do. And that's effectively I think the best lesson that you can take from this, and that we've tried to do in our company, and I think would pay dividends for a lot of people too. It's just, you have to be prepared for that turnover. And it's not always going to be bad. We have in our company, we have a lot of people going out on parental leave. I'm sure you probably face the same, right? And, parental leaves don't happen when we want them to happen. Right? As the owner of a company, it's never the most convenient solution, the most convenient person. It's always going to be like that director that you absolutely cannot afford to lose, or that staff member that is just doing awesome. And so you have to be prepared for the inevitability that we will lose everyone at some point at every role for at least a period of 6 months.
These are these continuity books. I love that term. It's like an SOP, like standard operating procedures manual, right?
Yeah.
And I can see someone from outside the military saying, well, the military, you got lives at stake, right? So you got to get it right. Well, guess what? We're in freaking autism services. We're working with kiddos to achieve life-changing outcomes. Lives are at stake. So if you don't have a continuity book, this is what I'm taking away. Go get those SOPs documented.
Yeah. I mean, even if you're managing a clinical team, you don't have to have everything, all the handwritten notes about each individual client's case. But if there's a structure that you put in place for how you manage your team, if there's a cadence to how you communicate with them and what they're used to and what's effective with different people, well, wouldn't you want to know that if you were walking in and taking on that job tomorrow?
Absolutely. It's a no-brainer. Well, so then walk me through your next transition. And how did you fall in love with our autism field, Scott?
Man, so you're not going to like this answer. I actually did not fall in love with the field, and I'm not necessarily in love with the field. However, it's the love for my niece, who has autism, that really kind of spurred all of this on. So my niece Tatum, she was diagnosed before she was 2, and she was the eye-opening moment for me and my family when it came to autism spectrum disorder and just all the supports that go with it. And here's a kid who benefited from just a ton of ABA when she was little. She's doing awesome right now. And so through her and then through my sister's eyes too, seeing both sides of that equation, that diagnosis is not just for the individual, but it's also for the family, and seeing what she was going through. And so it was my love for them that when this opportunity kind of came to me and my wife, Lindsay, we jumped in with both feet, because the way we looked at it, there's a huge problem here. If we have the ability to solve something, we're going to do it. And in Massachusetts, there's a huge need for providers. We were coming in at a time where she was working for an independent contractor down near Cape Cod. They were committing insurance fraud. She found it was all horrible stuff. But that was the catalyst, that seminal moment where we're like, you know what, we can fix this. And so we jumped in, and Tatum and my sister have been the inspiration for all of our processes, all of our standards, and the spirit behind what we do. So now looking back across the industry, I'd say, while I don't love the industry as it is today, I think that we're heading in a really positive direction. And I hate to sound negative, but I think it's more that, look, we are an industry that's growing with a lot of growing pains. There are a lot of contradictions out there between standards of clinical care, operational care, metrics, KPIs, you name it. And over time, those will get ironed out, and we will see as the industry matures, we're going to become a much better force for good and for quality care for the lives of these kids and their families. We're just not there yet. at a macro level. I think we're getting there, which is good.
Let's double click on that, because I think you're absolutely right. And it's something I might chalk up to, we've only had whatever it is, 10 years of legitimate sort of commercial and then subsequently Medicaid funding, right? So there's just a lot of infrastructure that other healthcare disciplines have been able to develop over years, decades. And we haven't had that amount of time. But I don't know if you were to pinpoint why there are so many disparate standards and KPIs that are looked at. Like, what is going on?
Man, if I could figure that one out. It is a multi-dimensional problem. On one hand, we have payer issues. We have the funding in different states, regulatory issues. You have inconsistency clinically across how care is provided between different types of models. You have it being provided in schools. What does IDEA say we can do? Do we have staff that are experiencing clinic-based services versus home-based services? It's all over the map. I'd say that one of the biggest areas of transition that I'd like to see happen, if we could see anything, is the shift away from an academic focus with ABA to an operational one. The field grew out of academia, and that's wonderful. And there's still a lot of great research happening in academia, and those professors out there doing great work, like they're putting good research out there, and they're helping influence the next generation of behavior analysts coming forward. But I don't think any of them will tell you that the studies that they're doing in their research setting are 100% totally applicable to the operational environment where the rest of us live and breathe, right? And that's where the rubber meets the road. And for me, looking back at my history and, again, coming back to the Air Force, we had, flying fighter jets. There was a operational test component that we called. There's an operational test arm of the Air Force where they take the newest ideas and tactics and technologies, and you'd have they'd be in development by these smart engineers and these academics, but then there'd be a whole nother group of people that would go out there and figure out, well, how can I take this knowledge from these really smart people and apply it here in the real world and make it replicable? How can I do that? And I think that's the part that we're missing right now. We don't have enough smart people out there focusing on how can we take this great body of knowledge and make it replicable and consistent across the board and let that be the standard.
The operational testing lab. I think there's a lot of wisdom in there, man. ABA practice owners, are billing and insurance issues getting you down? Well, let me tell you, Element RCM is your answer. Element provides world-class revenue cycle management services, contracting, credentialing, authorizations, billing, and more. Element's your partner, so you can focus on what you love to do, providing the highest quality services to your families and clients. Element's a preferred partner of the Behavioral Health Center of Excellence, and its founders have nearly 20 years of experience owning and operating successful ABA organizations. They understand you. They know that every dollar counts, that integrity is everything. Element works with any practice management system, and Element's not a vendor, they're your partner. So find out more and take a free revenue cycle assessment at elementrcm.ai. Well, so you went through this transition, and or you have a niece, Tatum, who got a diagnosis, and you said, I want something better for her, for my niece. How did you transition from the military, which some might look at it as more male dominated, hyper masculine, to lead a company in proven behavior that's, as I understand, more than 95% female?
Yeah, great question. I think I was lucky perhaps to have a slight break in between. I went to grad school for a year and then briefly worked in finance and hated it. But it gave me an opportunity to see a little bit more of the real world where people don't just talk in acronyms and aren't super aggressive and direct. And so that helped. But when we came into this field and I was getting involved in running the company and starting building out our teams and looking at how we interact with the staff, I had to be very cognizant about how I came across, especially coming in with someone who came from a military background. As a military officer, I'm still a military officer on the side. That is a identity that brings a lot of good and bad. And for some people who aren't familiar with it, they're going to make some assumptions about how I am and how I act. And so I had to be very aware of who I was and how the others perceived me, to the point where in the military culture, you could be very direct and, very, somewhat aggressive in your problem solving, but still very direct. You're not worried about hurting anybody's feelings. I mean, everyone's there for the right reasons. We're all committed to the same mission, and it's just about let's just learn and move on. Out here in the real world, or the outside world, if you will, I work with a lot of people who they don't come from that culture, and they are going to have their feelings perhaps hurt more if somebody's overtly direct or coming across as aggressive, if they're not sure what your intentions are, if you don't have a strong relationship with them already. And so you have to be more, I don't want to say sensitive to people, but I think it's more like you just have to be more aware that people communicate a lot differently than you're used to, and you have to meet them where they are. You have to be deliberate changing the way that you communicate. And so for me, it was trying to be more, it sounds kind of silly, but a little more jovial, more smiley. I had to be a little more participatory with how I talk to them sometimes, getting them on board and building that consensus. But also, even physically, I had to be careful about how I, manifested my presence in a room, not standing over somebody, kind of making sure that I was always looking at someone at their level whenever possible, just because I don't want to create any sense of physical or, emotional intimidation.
It's really interesting. I mean, what you described is, I heard this like communication, feedback, move at the speed of trust, right? You have to have some relationship to be able to provide feedback and dialogue. And a culture of directness actually feels like that's a valuable culture. And I'm a big fan of like the radical candor, deliver feedback very clearly, directly, but in a way that values the person. So in the military, is that culture of directness? I mean, is that just sort of like built into your training in the beginning, or like what can we learn from that in helping one another be direct?
Oh man, Jonathan, it was like you were a fly on the wall. I had a meeting with my directors earlier today, and we were talking about this exact topic. Funny enough, I'm not joking. So this comes up because I think that BCBAs do very well when it comes to providing clinical feedback, at least typically. I know that you've had other guests on the show, and they talk about feedback can be a problem in certain organizations. I totally see that. I think in our organization, we have the right systems and culture for proper, timely clinical feedback. Outside of that, though, that is challenging. Like when you don't necessarily know somebody very well, if you've got to call them out for a performance issue or an appearance issue. And so what I had to explain to my team was, in the world where I came from is just like you described. It was a high performance, radical candor culture where, you would go off and you'd be working with all sorts of different people, but the mission was the most important thing. And so we'd go out there and we'd fly these long, sorties, and we'd land, and it didn't matter if you were the brand new guy and you're flying with a general. Rank was nothing to be concerned about. All rank was off. And it was just very direct, like, hey, you made a mistake here. We could have done this better. What's going on? And it was all about finding the root cause and dialing into that. And so it worked, though, because over decades, a culture was created where there was this psychological safety that you were talking about, where it was accepted. It was understood why you're giving the feedback. It's understood from the receiver why they're getting it. How we took in that feedback, the decorum behind it, that was all well ironed out and established. And as you were a young person moving your way up into this world, you were receiving that feedback initially, and you're learning by observing, that social learning being so important, and identifying what were those norms that were required to be successful. And so you're eventually assimilating into this type of a culture. Now, going back to what we were talking about this morning with my team, it's going to be a challenge for anyone because, like you said, the industry is so young, and we have relatively young organizations. I mean, there are organizations that have been around for a while for sure, but they're still relatively young. We're trying to figure this out as a field and as a group of people. Like, how can we come together with all the intricacies that go on, the pressures of doing this type of work? How can we create that culture of psychological safety that allows for radical candor or radical compassion, I think is the latest iteration of that. And to me, it comes back to you have to start at the top. We have to model down what we want to see, because the people underneath us, they don't know how to do it. So if you have that idea in your head, this is how I want my organization to be, this is how I want the feedback to look, you have to model it. You have to do it every day. And then you have to talk about it. I can't remember the term, but it's just, you're memorializing these wins, you're reinforcing what you're seeing and what you're doing correctly with the rest of your team. So you're building momentum over time. And it's a long game. There's no easy answer. There's no easy button.
I'm going to pull on this thread now, Scott, because I'm fascinated by what you and your wife, whom I understand is a co-owner, the co-founder with you.
Yeah.
But what you all did to both grow and strengthen your culture, like pinpoint for me, what were the things that it took to get right?
It started with as we looked at the landscape to see what was going on with the industry here, lack of services. We didn't feel that the services available were of the right quality. And it wasn't to say that we didn't have good people. The place she was working at, that was bad, clearly. But in general, you have a lot of really good people out, and they're doing the best they can. Everybody cares. At some point, though, you have to make that transition of like, I really care a lot, to I care a lot and I need to do this better because I care. The status quo just isn't enough. And so we saw that there were significant gaps that we could overcome. And once we realized like we could come in here and create the right team to fill those gaps, it came back to this question, well, what do we want our team to look like? And, I'll say that I'll give credit to the now disgraced former governor of Missouri, Eric Greitens, who I had an opportunity to meet years ago when he was leading The Mission Continues, which was this really successful, wonderful nonprofit helping veterans do service work in their communities. And I heard him speak, and one of the things that he said that really stuck with me was that we become like the people we work with. And so when you think about the organizations that you're going to go work for and the people you want to work with, you want to make sure that the people are the type of people you want to become, right? Because at the end of the day, like we become kind of like each other. We become very homogenous despite our best efforts. And so with that realization and that insight, we sat down and we deliberately thought like, what kind of an organization do we want? But more importantly, what kind of people do we want to be around us? What kind of people do we want to share the same culture? What type of values do we want to see reflected in everybody on our team? And so that led to the core values creation. And then from there, that influenced our hiring decisions. It influenced, the way we structure some of our processes, the feedback programs that we have, you name it. Everything came back to, starting first with, what are the type of people we want here? And then that bled into the values and then into the structure.
So you just like put a light bulb off in my mind, because I think it's true that most people, myself included, as my partners and I started Ascend 5 years ago, is we ask first, like, what's the organization that we want? What's the organization, or what in our instance, like, what's the organization we always want to be a part of? But look, we are in human services. We are our people.
Yeah.
And just turning that question around to what kind of people do we want is like super insightful, man.
Yeah, well, because then you hit it right on the head, too, because we are a human services organization. At the end of the day, our success is not driven by how many widgets we create or, how successful our marketing campaign was. It's how successful are our people at their jobs. And that bleeds into, not just culture, but you talk about turnover problems, job satisfaction, morale, you name it. There are all sorts of operational KPIs that come back to the longevity and sustainability of a business in our field, and it definitely has to have that focus on the people. I think the companies that are doing it well, like yours, you have a really strong relationship with your staff, and I see you on social media all the time. Like you are a champion and a cheerleader for the work that they're doing, and they see that, and that's really valuable. It's like we are, I guess, as heads of the organization, we are our core values in action, and every time our staff see us, they should see that.
We are our core values in action. Oh, this is just like clickbait. This is genius, Scott.
I'm doing what I can, I'm going to get you some more traffic.
Yeah, it makes so much sense. Like, and we have to, to your point earlier, like we have to model these things and teach our teams this. We can't just assume, it's like culture. Culture just doesn't happen like randomly, right? By happenstance. You've got to be super deliberate about it.
Yeah.
But tell me, I'd love to understand how you made the decision to take on outside private equity investments and how, or whether things were different, before and after.
Yeah, it comes back, and private equity is a common punching bag these days. So, to dispel the myth right up front, there's not bad private equity necessarily. I think there are people make good and bad decisions, and there are outcomes that come from all of those things. And so I think we need to afford other people the grace of not having the full perspective sometimes on what's happening. But when it came for us, it really was, our company was growing rapidly. Lindsay and I had no design on becoming a massive company from the beginning. And, it seems kind of counterintuitive as well. But, there was no master plan. Early on, we were flying by the seat of our pants, so to speak, and just responding to the need. And our growth thesis was, if there was a need out there, if a family called us from a town, if we couldn't service them today, well, if we could service them in a month, then great. We'd kind of go into that area, all predicated on having staff. And so we were able to continue to grow to meet the need of the families around us because we started attracting the right people, and it just kind of started to sustain itself. And then when you get your head above water, you're like, wait a second, we really got something special here. Okay, let's start thinking a year out now. Okay, let's start thinking 2 years out now. What do we want this to be? And now as we start, in years 2 and 3, we really started looking ahead. And what we saw was that, first of all, we couldn't, doing this work, find enough capital to sustain the growth that we wanted. We don't have the traditional assets like all these other companies, and we don't have the respect that you would get from a brand new startup physician's practice, from the banks. The banks don't want to loan you money unless you don't need it, right? And so to grow as fast as we did, I spent all my time, I felt like raising money, just trying to hit up the banks, getting more lines of credit, different term loans, whatever we needed to finance the growth of our centers. And on it went. And so there was that realization of we just don't have the traditional assets as collateral to support that growth. So you can do it, but you're just going to grow a lot slower. So that was part of it. The next part was seeing what was happening in the industry with a lot of these larger investor-backed companies moving into areas where there's favorable reimbursement. Massachusetts is one of them. I was terrified, like that, a month from now, I could have a big box, so to speak, ABA company throw down a center right across the street from one of my buildings, and it's beautiful, and they're going to pay brand new BCBAs with no experience, 6 figures. You're going to see that drain of talent locally in the area. Maybe it's not going to last because if the quality is bad, things will kind of rebound, but it's going to hurt. And I was terrified about that because I couldn't prevent it. And I feel like we've seen a lot of growth in the industry right now where it's akin to like a land grab where and we saw larger organizations do this in the Boston area where just to establish that beachhead, that foothold, they would open an office, they would advertise insane salaries just to get BCBAs in the door, just to start servicing clients, and then generate momentum from there to establish, further operations. And so it was a defensive measure. Like we wanted to compete and we had to protect ourselves. And so we needed capital to do that. But then with COVID, it wasn't really until the second year of COVID where it truly hit home for me and Lindsay that by taking we were not averse to risk. We were growing very aggressively, even throughout COVID. We doubled down on this idea of, we were going to absorb cancellations due to COVID by achieving greater scale and keeping everybody employed. And we were successful. The downside to it was that as we grew, our margins disappeared during COVID, and you become very sensitive to the slightest shocks to reimbursement cycles or whatever. And now we have these different surges coming, different variants. And she and I are looking at each other like, oh my gosh, like we're out of options because we can't get any more money from the banks. If another big Omicron Part 5 Jaws the Revenge happens, like we're screwed. There's nobody else to help us out. And, our team was so big by that point where we're looking at ourselves like we didn't feel that it was ethically in our interest to continue doing what we were doing without finding some type of redundancy. We needed a backstop. We wanted our staff to have the assurance that no matter what happened, they had jobs. Like, this company was going to be around. And so the only way we thought we could do that was to take ourselves at least partly out of it and bring on a partner to help kind of shoulder the risk.
I think I really appreciate you pulling the curtain back. And I think what a lot of people don't understand about entrepreneurship is like your person. It's not just delivering to your mission and what you purport to do as an organization, but your like entire personal financial state is on the line, right? And there's only so many home equity loans you go take out, right, to make that next payroll before
That's
it's just
right.
like, wow. I mean, there's like existential risks, career risks, and things that are faced, in addition to just like this critical importance of delivering highest quality care. And so I really appreciate how you were forward thinking about, for example, making sure your teams were taken care of, and that you're just realizing it's not black or white, in thinking about taking on outside capital.
Yeah, I mean, you'd think that, especially coming out of the military, that this would be kind of a walk in the park. I'm used to making decisions on whether or not somebody might die. And as an officer, you're trained to make those types of decisions. And frankly, having developed in that environment and being a part of that culture for so long, those are easy decisions for me because that's part of what we do. Like, everyone understands the expectation in the military and what it takes sometimes to get our jobs done. Here on the outside, running an ABA company, oh my gosh, like, I was more nervous and anxious, if you will, about making bad decisions that would cost people their jobs because, to me, I was more worried about ruining somebody's livelihood and affecting their ability to put food on the table for their families. Because at the end of the day, that's not what they signed up for. That's all on me.
Wow. So well said. Well then, Scott, what's one thing every ABA practice owner should start doing and one thing they should stop doing?
I think that ABA owners in general should start seeking outside opinions or outside advice. I think that we rely too much on the industry itself to provide the answers. And so, a good example is SCORE. I don't know have you ever talked to a SCORE advisor?
Mm-mm.
Yeah, so SCORE it's the Service Corps of Retired Executives. It's an office with the SBA, so they have SCORE offices in every major city where there's an SBA office. Like, they're kind of in regions, and it's awesome because you've got all these retired executives. Maybe some of them have exited their own companies, have done the CEO role, CFOs, you name it. They're retired, and all they want to do is just come in and help young business owners make smart decisions about how to grow their businesses, and it's all free. Like, that's the beauty of it. It is all 100% free. And you can make an appointment with SCORE and talk to a former CFO, and he'll give you invaluable advice. And I'll tell you from personal experience, because of the work we do, working with kids and helping to change lives of children and their families, these SCORE executives, they will bend over backwards to give you everything that you could possibly want to know for free. That's a huge untapped resource that I wish more people knew about. And so then, what something I want ABA companies to stop, I guess, along the same lines, just flipping it back around. I wish that more ABA companies or more ABA providers stopped using Facebook groups to solicit advice. Getting on some of these groups there's some good advice, I'm sure. There's some really, really, really bad advice that's getting thrown out there. And sad to say, I think some people don't have access to the right individuals to run things by to realize, like, well, that's really a bad idea.
Well said. It's almost like, if as a practice owner, if you think you're the smartest person in the room, go find a different room.
Oh, yeah, exactly.
As you point out, there are all kinds of resources for free that we can get. In fact, we got early on, we got a line of credit through sort of a local community-based nonprofit that does lending, and then they brought a retired executive the same way. Yeah. And so those resources exist. Well, Scott, where can people find you online?
I'm really not active on Facebook all that much. Probably the best place is through LinkedIn. Otherwise, you can always email me, spsnider@provenaba.com. But LinkedIn is definitely the easiest place.
Right on. Well, we'll drop a link to your LinkedIn and to Proven Behavior Solutions website in the show notes. So are you ready for the hot take questions, man?
Oh, yeah. Lay it on.
Here we go. First one, is Top Gun 2 realistic?
Oh, no, it is not.
Oh my gosh, give me this quick soundbite on why.
Yeah, no, so what is great about Top Gun, it's a fun movie. The flying footage is awesome. And what I particularly enjoyed is that it really it shows, not to the full extent, but it definitely shows how hard it is to fly these jets and do those things. I mean, if you're seeing Tom Cruise and he's grunting under the G's and like his face, like his skin's getting pulled down. I can tell you, like when I was doing the centrifuge training to fly fighters, like I have a video of me, and at 8 G's, I look like Bill Cosby. Like everything's just like pulled down. Like it's pretty comical. And it's physically demanding. It is hard on the body. And when you think about it, like, these guys doing this job, not only are they trying to fight an adversary or do whatever, but they are trying to keep themselves awake. You're physically fighting the force of gravity to keep the blood in your brain to stay conscious. You're breathing every 2 to 3 seconds in sharp air exchanges to keep thoracic pressure so your lungs don't collapse. Like, it is no joke. And that was cool because the movie definitely showed the discomfort. It's not like Maverick and Goose just, throwing jokes at each other, like no big deal. And, to make it fun, you have to show jets really close together. They had to bring in every caricature or stereotype of what Hollywood thought a fighter pilot was into the movie to make it entertaining. I will tell you, I have not met a single fighter pilot that has six-pack abs. They're probably out there, but I didn't see it, and we don't play a whole lot of beach volleyball or whatever that game was. There's offense and defense at the same time. Like it was a fun movie, but definitely Hollywoodized.
All right, so no six-pack abs. I'm devastated because I would have assumed every one of y'all fighter pilots has them and played, beach volleyball.
Of course.
Well, Scott, you're on your deathbed. What's the one thing you want to be remembered for?
I want to be remembered for the amount of people that I was able to help. I've always been a very big public service guy, and one of the things that I really love about the work that we do, and I think that you probably feel the same way, is just the amount of impact that you can have at scale. The more we grow, the more families that we can help. And so for me, that's it. Whether it's through this or some other work, I want to be known for helping people.
Spoken like a true servant leader. Well, what's your most important self-care practice?
I work out. I hit the gym fairly regularly, and it's honestly kind of a dual purpose thing because I do my best strategic thinking when I'm just like zoning out in the gym with my headphones in, because it's, I've got 3 young kids, and with everything else that's going on, like that's kind of my time to just focus on me and think.
Nice. So it sounds like you probably do have those six-pack abs. I'm not going to leave you from early.
Not anymore. No, not in this 42-year-old body.
All right. Well, you're listening to your music. Like, what's your favorite song?
It is Big Empty, Stone Temple Pilots. So I was definitely a grunge kid. Yeah.
Classic yep. 90s grunge.
Love it.
Grunge killed the hair bands and the heavy metal from the 80s that
Love
I was
it.
fond of. That's can't go wrong with it. STP. If you could give your 18-year-old self one piece of advice, what would it be?
I honestly don't know, because I feel like we are such a perfect product of everything that's happened to us. And, unless you're sitting here listening to this and just down on yourself because you're like, man, I just screwed everything up. I feel pretty blessed to be where I am and, to be talking to you right now. And I don't feel like, if I had done anything different, I wouldn't want things to change. Surely there were lots of ups and downs, but everything led me to this moment. So, more than anything else, I would love the opportunity just to go back with a bowl of popcorn and just, laugh at myself. Like, oh, here we go. He's going to do, oh, yep, he did that. Oh, okay.
Oh, you're so wise, dude. I think if I had that bowl of popcorn and was looking at myself, I would be cringing.
Oh, it's so bad. It's so bad. Oh, I'm thinking about stuff right now. I'm like, oh, but it made me a better person. Got to remind myself.
Very healthy outlook, Scott. I appreciate that. Well, you can only wear one style of footwear. What would it be?
Dude, I love Zero Shoes. I don't know if you ever heard about them. This is not me trying to make a marketing plug for this company, although I should probably contact them afterwards. It's XERO. They were on Shark Tank, and it's a minimalist shoe, so just barefoot style, but they're the most comfortable shoes I've ever worn. And you got to be careful with them, because if you've never worn kind of minimalist zero drop shoes before, it can hurt your feet and your ankles for a while until you get used to it. I've been wearing them for a long. It's awesome. Like I wear them all the time. It's like I'm walking barefoot.
Well, Well, Scott, thank you
Highly
for
recommend it.
thank you for everything you're doing to serve kiddos with autism, and thanks for sharing your wisdom, man.
Yeah, thank you, Jonathan. This was awesome. I appreciate it.
What up, listeners? Hey, I got something for you. If you like my Building Better Businesses in ABA podcast, you're going to love the Behavioral Observations podcast with Matt Sikoria. So I recently met Matt at ABAI, and let me tell you, I was just an instant fanboy. Matt's the real deal. His pod is all about stimulating talk for today's behavior analysts. So session 191 on his pod is on the behavior analysis of lying. That's right, lying. How awesome is that? Who does that? He also talks social skills, ACT, FAs, and so much more. His guests include Greg Hanley, Jonathan Tarbox, and other legendary names in our field. And as a BCBA, you can even get CEU credits through Behavioral Observations. You can find Matt and the Behavioral Observations podcast on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, or your favorite podcast channel. Enjoy, friends.
Thanks for listening to Building Better Businesses in ABA podcast. Stay tuned for our next exciting episode. In the meantime, please like, subscribe, share, and comment. We value your feedback. Don't forget to follow us on social media at elementrcm.ai.